Hamas has said yes to parts of Donald Trump's plan on Gaza, and the U.S. president tells Israel to stop bombing the Strip. Now, negotiations will seek to implement the plan. So are they likely to work? And can the war finally come to an end? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Dareen Abughaida. Negotiations are due to begin in Cairo that the President of the United States says may bring about an end to the war on Gaza. Hamas has largely agreed to Donald Trump's peace plan, but with major caveats. So has the Israeli Prime Minister. But the details have yet to be agreed, including on how Israeli forces withdraw and who's to govern the Strip. So is it possible to draw up a plan that all sides can agree to? What would an interim government look like? And what does all of this mean for the Palestinian people? We'll put these questions to our guests, but first this report from Imogen Kimber.
US President Trump says this could be the beginning of the end of Israel's 2-year war on Gaza, as Hamas agrees to most of his 20-point peace plan.
It's happy news. It saves those who are still alive. Thank God Hamas agreed. But what is left? Nothing. We're living in a desert, but thank God after all.
We are happy that the war will stop because we are tired of hunger, displacement and bloodshed. We want to regain the feeling of safety and to return to our homes.
Hamas says it will release the remaining captives, those living and the bodies of the dead. But Israel needs to withdraw from the Strip and allow aid in to stop the famine. Implementing this is subject to negotiation. Hamas says it will surrender power in Gaza, but it must only be governed by Palestinians, rejecting the idea of an international transitional authority.
We will never accept anyone not Palestinian, to control the Palestinian. But this does not belong to Hamas only. This belongs all of the Palestinian and the Palestinian Authority. We can't bring someone like Tony Blair to be governor in Gaza.
Hamas also says it will not disarm at the moment, something Israel has requested.
If the occupation ends and the Palestinians control themselves and there is a Palestinian state, Hamas no longer gonna have any kind of weapon. That's what we said from the beginning. We don't need the weapon if there is no occupation.
Trump says this is a historical moment.
This is a very special day, maybe unprecedented in many ways. It is unprecedented. Everybody was unified in wanting this war to end and seeing peace in the Middle East. And we're very close to achieving that. Thank you all, and everybody will be treated fairly.
Trump also ordered Israel to immediately stop the bombardment, but Israel did not. It continued drone strikes and has killed more people, including several children, since the president's request. On X, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israeli troops will be able to remain in parts of Gaza. What happens next will depend on what's agreed when negotiations are held in Cairo. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
We'll talk to our guests in a moment, but first, let's go to Noor al-Saqa. She's a resident of Gaza. That's where she's joining us from. Noor, thanks for your time. So there must be cautious optimism in Gaza. That's what we're hearing. How are people feeling?
Thank you for having me. People have, people in Gaza generally have gone through horrors during this genocide that it feels almost unreal that a mere discussion on a ceasefire is happening at the moment. We're cautiously waiting what's to happen next, but the most important thing for everyone in Gaza Strip is for this genocide to end, for this bloodshed to stop. Up until yesterday, where the roads between Gaza has been split again by Israeli forces to the north and the south, marking a very dangerous step towards what is to happen next, because it feels like this is a vicious cycle that's repeating itself, where Israeli forces have done this before, back in October 2023, splitting the Strip in half. Yet now we're forced to move to the south, to areas that were shrinking by Israeli military displacement orders and the constant bombardment and complete ethnic cleansing of so many parts of southern Gaza, including whole cities like Rafah, for example. So yeah, everyone is cautious.
Noor, and in
Hoping
terms
for
of the
a ceasefire.
what are you seeing and hearing on the ground? Because we understand that Trump told Israel to stop the bombing.
I wish that was true, but unfortunately, I have heard bombings since yesterday. According to the Ministry of Health, there's been tens of people killed, arriving to the very overwhelmed and collapsed remaining hospitals in the Strip. So the situation is still extremely dire. People are still getting killed in every single shape and form. The living conditions are beyond horrific. But I think if you ask anyone, the top priority right now is for the mass indiscriminate killing of Israel needs to stop.
And
Nothing else. And then we're gonna, yeah.
And Noor, there is a huge urgency, of course, for humanitarian aid to come into the Strip for food, medication, all these desperately needed supplies. How desperate is the humanitarian situation right now?
100%. The problem with the humanitarian situation is that it keeps getting worse. As Israeli forces intensify their targets and bombings to various health facilities, like the very few remaining health facilities across the Strip, they're further depriving people of their access to healthcare. And right now, we're witnessing, like during this famine, people are in desperate need for access to health care. So many are dying, and in various ways, just because they cannot simply access a hospital. I mean, patients are on the floors, and the problem is that there's a huge lack of resources. It's a scarcity in every single shape and form, whether it's food, fuel that is used to running desalination plants, for producing water, for transportation, for everything. Everything is extremely scarce. Hundreds of thousands of people are crammed in less than 15% of Gaza Strip, according to the UN. And this on itself, every single aspect of the living conditions on its own, is a humanitarian crisis. And what we're seeing in Gaza is like the weaponization of every single aspect of those basic life necessities, whether it's food, whether it's water, whether it's health services, whether it's shelter. Everything's being weaponized against Palestinians in Gaza.
Okay, we will leave it there. Noor al-Saka, thank you so much for joining us from Gaza and giving us the perspective from there. Thank you. Let's now bring in our guest. Joining us from Montreal is Mouin Rabbani, who's a researcher and analyst and co-editor at online magazine Jadaliyya. In London, Yossi Mekelberg is a political analyst and senior consulting fellow at Chatham House. In Copenhagen, Mohammed Shehada is an analyst from Gaza and senior fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome to the program. Thanks for your time. Mouin Rabbani, what do you make of Hamas's response to Trump's Gaza plan?
Well, Hamas had been placed between a very large rock and a very hard place, and it needed to find a way to respond to Trump's proposal and ultimatum that would be viewed as sufficiently constructive so as not to be interpreted as a rejection. And I think it succeeded in doing so, in part by playing to Trump's vanity and thanking him personally for issuing this proposal. But at the same time, they essentially accepted what they have previously already accepted and either ignored or called for clarifications or deferred to a Palestinian national consensus and international law on those elements which they have not previously accepted. It seems to have done the trick because Washington has now announced that negotiations will resume in Cairo about the details of what had already been a very vague agreement. I think the ball is now very much in Washington's court. Will it indeed this time compel Israel to follow through on this, or will Israel once again, as it did in January, February, as it did with the Iran nuclear negotiations, be allowed to sabotage them with the support of Washington?
Yossi, do you agree that the ball is in Washington's court? I mean, the next few days are going to be crucial, right, to iron out the details of this plan. There are so many players right now. So whose court is the ball in?
I completely agree with Mouin that at the end of the day, the ball is in Washington court. We saw it, as Mouin mentioned earlier, when the first ceasefire in January, even before Trump was inaugurated, he wanted it just before he becomes president to have an agreement. Unfortunately, it was violated by Israel on March. And then we saw it with the war with Iran, that when Trump said enough is enough, then Israel stopped the bombing of Iran. So I think that's important to look at. And when Trump says yesterday that the airstrike should stop also in Gaza, yes, it didn't completely stop, but there is even the Israelis admit that there is a reduction in military operations in Gaza and the move from offensive to more defensive points. So this is it. But at the same time, we have two sides now that are actually fighting from a leadership point of view for their future relevance, whether they can survive politically beyond the ceasefire. And they will be jockeying for position throughout this negotiation. So I don't think we should underestimate their ability to sabotage such an agreement. We know in the case of Hamas, whether if they agree to the decommissioning of weapons, if they agree to leave the Strip, then they lose relevance in Palestinian politics. If Netanyahu agrees to this agreement, at the end of the day, he might lose the support of some of his coalition partners, and he will have to rely on the opposition that he has for this agreement, but then it will probably follow by the elections. So they will try to improve their position as they negotiate.
Okay, we're going to come back to these points, but let me bring in Mohammed Shehada. Mohammed, the devil is in the details, isn't it? We know that Hamas has agreed, according to their statement, to release the captives, those that have been killed and those that are alive. But the captives have been their only bargaining chip so far. Is it likely to give up on them that easily, some people ask?
No, you're right, Dareen. So basically what Hamas is saying is we are ready to release the captives immediately if Israel agrees to the two principles, that a ceasefire actually means a ceasefire, not just when Palestinians seize and Israel fires, as Rifat al-Hariri used to put it. So it means an end to the war. And number two, full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza to the last soldier. Everything else can be discussed in the negotiations, but those are the two basic principles that it's very difficult to compromise on, because if you have any presence of the IDF inside Gaza, it means the continuation of the genocide. And if you have Israel saying we will only suspend offensive operations or we will suspend the bombing, they can get around it in all sorts of ways. So this morning, for example, Israel said, we suspended the offensive operations. We will maintain only defensive operations. It practically meant absolutely nothing. The bombing is still continuing. There's still shelling, arbitrary firing of machine guns into areas that are densely populated. And you have Israeli government officials until now telling people in northern Gaza, leave or you will die. We will consider every last one of you to be a terrorist, and you will be dealt with accordingly. So as long as you don't have those two principles guaranteed, it's very difficult to see the release of the hostages or the captives in Gaza being secured.
Yeah. Okay, Mouin, Hamas says that it's ready to hand Gaza's administration to an independent Palestinian technocratic body backed by Arab states. How serious of a proposal is that, do you think, or is that some sort of strategic move?
Well, this is a key point because the proposal basically wanted to make Tony Blair, of all people, the colonial viceroy of the Gaza Strip. Essentially, he and Jared Kushner and Larry Ellison would turn it into some kind of digital dystopia. And Hamas has made very clear that the Gaza Strip should be governed by Palestinians. It has already some time ago accepted that those Palestinians would not include Hamas. But the key issue now is, will Gaza be administered? Will it be governed by Palestinian civil servants and municipal clerks on behalf of a foreign body, or will it be governed by Palestinians, if and where necessary, assisted and supported by outsiders? And this is also, I think, a key issue for the Arab states and the Muslim states that are participating in this, because they have made clear from the outset that without a role, without Palestinian governance in the Gaza Strip, and without a clear pathway to an end to occupation in a Palestinian state, they are not going to get involved by investing significant sums of money, let alone security forces, into the Gaza Strip.
And for any government, Mouin, just a follow-up for you, for any government that backs a U.S.-led stabilization force, right, does it then risk complicity and effectively continuing the occupation?
Very much so. I mean, this so-called stabilization force, is it there to promote Israeli interests or Palestinian interests? The proposal is quite clear. In the Gaza Strip, it is only Israel that has rights, and Israel's rights trump and come at the expense of anything the Palestinians may want. And now that the U.S. has accepted the principle of negotiations, it'll be a hard slog to ensure that governance, security is first and foremost in the interests of those who have now been subjected to a 2-year genocide, and leads to a pathway for a better political future, rather than some kind of, revival of an Oslo process that simply leads to interminable more of the same.
Yossi, let's discuss more a little bit about Netanyahu's political survival. You were mentioning this a moment ago, because given reports that Netanyahu himself personally edited Trump's draft to basically delay and dilute any withdrawal for his military from the Gaza Strip, do you think this plan is really about peace or a ceasefire, or is it about his political survival?
For Netanyahu, it's always been about his political survival. He needs to explain to its own people, the failure of October 7, that he has failed to do so, to agree to an official investigation, an independent one in Israel, and then the way that the war has been conducted over the last 2 years, that isolated Israel, made it to a large extent a pariah state since then. And all of this needs to be explained, to first and foremost to the Israeli people, but also the international community. We know that we see public opinion polls that don't want to see Netanyahu as prime minister anymore. Israel said for a long time they would like to see a ceasefire and the return of the hostages. This has been their priority. But he had the majority, still has a majority support within the Knesset, so he's still the prime minister. The minute that he agrees to this deal, it also means that he might lose the more extreme partner in the coalition. He will get the support within parliament because the opposition committed itself to support a deal that will see the hostages back and the end of the war. But this won't last for long. So sometimes between now, the elections are due next October, but probably earlier, Israel will hold the election, and we might see the last of Netanyahu as a prime minister.
But Yossi, look, some people say that Trump also wants some sort of grand moment of deal-making, right? We know that the president of the United States likes to do this, but Netanyahu wants perpetual conflict in order to hold on to his coalition. So is then this plan perhaps doomed because you have these two sort of opposing incentives right now?
But that's exactly where Trump will have to press ahead with the plan. And at the end of the day, within the 20 points of the plan, some of them are more long-term. Look, the reconstruction of Gaza will take time. Establishing new governance there will take time. Definitely moving into an idea of ending the conflict towards a two-state solution. This won't happen overnight. But the crucial point from Netanyahu's point of view is as you say, ending the war. And the minute that he agrees with that, then he falls out with some of his coalition partners. But that's exactly where the role of the United States is so crucial. And I don't think that Netanyahu can afford to clash directly with Trump. Will he try to sabotage this at any deal? Probably he would. Can he do that effectively at this stage? I think this is also not only what happens in Washington, I think this will also make clear to Israeli people that Netanyahu is definitely not interested in the end of war, and they need to take to the streets if this is the case.
Mohammed Shehada, the issue of Hamas's disarmament, this is something that Israel has been demanding, right? Hasn't come up, and Hamas hasn't mentioned anything about this. What do you make of that?
Well, basically, there's a number of things to say here. Number one, Palestinians have a better experience with disarmament and what Israel would do to us afterwards. So if you remember, after the invasion of Lebanon in 1982, the PLO was asked to disarm, lay down its weapons, and leave Lebanon. As soon as they agreed to this, you had the Sabra and Shatila massacre unfolding immediately. It was about 3 to 4 October 7th in one day, in one area, where you had almost or even more than 3,500 Palestinians slaughtered, butchered, murdered, raped, etc. within that massacre. So that's why one of the reasons why the trauma of Palestinians would reject the idea of disarmament. Now, the other thing is basically in the framework that Netanyahu presented in the final version of Trump's proposal, you had withdrawal from Gaza left up to the Israelis completely. There's absolutely no guarantee that even after Hamas disarms and dissolves itself and leaves Gaza, that Israel would ever leave Gaza. So that does not create any incentive for a discussion on this topic if your proposal to Palestinians is lay down your arms so that we can kill you and kick you out faster. Now, with the disarmament itself, I was impressed with the earlier version of the Trump plan, the one that Netanyahu changed and altered dramatically, because it did not make any mention of disarmament. It only made mention of decommissioning, something like Northern Ireland, where decommissioning is the outcome of a peace process, not the prerequisite. And it even specified, it says decommissioning of the offensive weaponry, not the defensive. What that means is it would mean the slow, gradual decommissioning of Hamas's rockets or tunnels, but not the weapons that can be used to maintain an insurgency should the IDF refuse to leave. So that's RPGs or anti-tank missiles or Kalashnikovs. And Netanyahu changed that in the updated version completely to say decommissioning, demilitarization, disarmament of everything. And even afterwards, he says the IDF will stay in Gaza.
Mohammed, how does Hamas then ensure enforcement of guarantees on the ground?
Well, basically, they have the ultimate card of insurance, which is the captives, the hostages that they have at the moment. The secondary card of insurance is actually the weapons themselves. So in the case of Northern Ireland, what you had is the IRA, they did not dismantle their weaponry immediately. Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998. It took until 2007, almost 9 years, for the decommissioning of the IRA. They instead put the weapons in a depot, and the weapons acted as a guarantee that the agreement would be fulfilled to the end of it. So I think around 2001, the IRA said the agreement is not being fulfilled in good faith, therefore we would refuse to dismantle the weapons that are locked up in a warehouse. And then you needed civil society and mediators to step in and fulfill the agreement. And Hamas envisions something similar, where they would see that the armaments, the weapons that they have, although it's not much, but the very little that they have in Gaza at the moment would act as the insurance card to see the fulfillment of the agreement. Otherwise, it's about opting for the maximum plausibility.
Right.
There's no guarantee. Like Trump's guarantees are worthless. It's the same as any other guarantee provided when it comes to Netanyahu. We saw it with the earlier ceasefire, a huge amount of guarantees. Netanyahu decided to collapse it whenever it suited him. So guarantees are not, they do not mean much. It's about maximum plausibility.
Mouin, final thoughts from you, whether you're optimistic in the days and weeks, perhaps, that are coming up?
No, I'm not, because in these kinds of situations, we've consistently seen that Israel ultimately gets its way in Washington. And I suspect that once again, Israel will be able to successfully either change the terms of this agreement to an extent that the Palestinians won't be able to accept it, or will be able to sabotage it in practice. And that if it does indeed go through, Israel will do everything to have it be some kind of Lebanon-style ceasefire, where only the other side is compelled to respect it. The issue here now is we also have a very different momentum and dynamic, and that is the sea change in global opinion, the increasing activism of foreign governments. And I think it is the challenge for the Palestinians to keep promoting this momentum so that it overtakes these silly diplomatic games, which are essentially seek to keep the Palestinians eternally subordinated to Israeli occupation and Israeli interests.
Okay, on that note, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much to my guests, Mouin Rabbani, Yossi Mekelberg, and Mohammed Shehada. Thanks for your time. Thanks for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Join the conversation on X. Our handle is AJ Inside Story. Myself and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching, and bye-bye for now.